Saturday night, November 2nd, 1907, 36th Street, Manhattan. John Pierpont Morgan turns a brass key in his library door and drops it in his waistcoat pocket. About 50 bankers are in the rooms either side. Nobody leaves until they sign. $1.8 trillion, larger than the entire American junk bond market. That is what the same kind of lender manages today. In 1907, they called it a trust company. It wore a bank's marble and obeyed none of a bank's rules. No central bank existed. No deposit insurance existed. A trust called the Knickerbocker had just brought the whole thing down. A national bank in New York had to keep about 25 cents of every deposited dollar in cash, in its own vault. A New York trust company kept 5. One could survive a bad morning. The other could survive about 20 minutes. Chartered to hold estates and execute wills, the trusts were by now lending against stock and paying better interest than the banks. Every bank that mattered cleared its checks through one room, the New York Clearing House, which in a crisis lent members paper to pay with. Everyone else cleared through a member. Not one trust company was a member. They had all walked out in 1903 rather than hold the reserves. Nearly every private credit fund alive today borrows from a bank. The non-bank still needs the bank. October 14th, Otto Heinze was convinced the short sellers of United Copper had sold shares they could not deliver. So he bought. Monday, the stock ran from about $39 to $52, roughly $1,300 to $1,700 today. Tuesday, he demanded the borrowed stock back and it touched 60. By Wednesday, United Copper was falling toward 10. The corner ate the man who said it. Thursday, the exchange suspended his firm, and a savings bank in Butte, Montana, 2,000 miles away, shut its doors the same day. Otto's brother Augustus ran the Mercantile National Bank. The clearinghouse saved Mercantile and took his resignation. Augustus had a partner, Charles Morse. Between them, they sat on the boards of at least 6 national banks, 10 state banks, and 5 trust companies. Morse was known to be close to Charles Barney, president of the Knickerbocker Trust, third largest in New York, $60 million of other people's money, close to $2 billion today. Nobody outside it knew what the loans were secured against. Monday, October 21st, the National Bank of Commerce told the clearinghouse it would no longer clear checks for the Knickerbocker, a trust that cannot clear, cannot pay. By the time the papers landed on Tuesday, the depositors knew. The queue on Fifth Avenue formed before the doors opened. In about 3 hours, the Knickerbocker paid out roughly $8 million across the counter, close to $280 million today. Just after noon, the paying teller closed the grill. A fund in Manhattan opens its redemption window this morning. Nobody outside it can see the loans either. Same building, better glass. Morgan was 70 years old and 300 miles away when it started, at a church convention in Richmond, Virginia. He came north on a night train 2 days before the grill came down. He held no office, a private banker with a black cigar and a diseased, swollen nose, running the finances of the United States out of his own front room for 2 weeks. One of his young men was Benjamin Strong, 34, who read the Trust Company of the Americas books by dawn. The solvent got saved. The Knickerbocker was left to close. He had already decided the last of it would be settled in his own library, with the door locked. Thursday, October 24th. Call money is the overnight loan that lets the floor trade. That morning it opened at 6%. By midday, 60% was bid and no money was offered. It reached 100 before the close. The president of the exchange came to say he would close early. Morgan told him it would stay open until 3 and sent for the Citibank presidents. It took about 15 minutes. $23.6 million, close to $800 million today. The Treasury had put in $25 million that morning and could only put it into the banks. When the rate came down, the floor stood and cheered a private citizen. Saturday night, November 2nd, bank presidents in the East Room, trust presidents in the West Room. Morgan sits in the librarian's office with the cards and works the 2 rooms against each other for most of the night. At 3 in the morning, he puts a subscription paper in front of the trust men, tells each what he will contribute, and offers a pen. They sign at about 4:45, in evening clothes, under a painted Italian ceiling. Then they are allowed to go home. One man had asked to be in that room. Charles Barney tried to reach Morgan after the Knickerbocker fell. He never got in front of him. On the 14th of November, he shot himself in his house at Park Avenue and 38th Street, 3 blocks from that door. 11 days after the signing, the man whose name started the run was the only one billed in full. Back to that same weekend. A brokerage called Moore and Schley was failing on a mountain of Tennessee coal and iron stock. Morgan's United States Steel offered to buy the company. 2 of his men took a night train to Washington and put it to President Roosevelt over breakfast. He let it pass before the market opened. The acute panic eased within days. The recession ran into 1908. The largest corporation in America got larger, and the antitrust question was waved through over coffee and litigated for the next 9 years. Congress had watched one private citizen with a cigar do the work no institution existed to do. Senator Nelson Aldrich got his commission. In November 1910, 6 men took a private rail car to a hunting club on Jekyll Island, Georgia, and drafted the architecture. In December 1913, the Federal Reserve Act became law. Morgan had died in Rome 9 months earlier. Benjamin Strong, the young man with the ledgers, became the first head of the Federal Reserve Bank of New York. The trust came back as private credit, funds lending straight to companies from an office with no vault, about $1.8 trillion of it under management by the common count, doing what a bank does without what a bank has. No deposit insurance, no key to the discount window. The money comes from pensions and insurers who sign 10-year lockups, and from the banks themselves, which lend to the funds that replace them. A loan is worth what the manager who made it says it is worth, quarterly on a model. The Knickerbocker's money could walk out of the door on a Tuesday morning. Institutional money cannot. The funds that gated this year were the retail vehicles that had promised a quarterly window. Blue Owl closed redemptions on a $1.6 billion fund in February. A BlackRock fund holding $26 billion, 13 times the size of the Knickerbocker in today's money. Restricted withdrawals in March. BlackRock's gate worked exactly as written. Blue Owl rewrote the terms. That is the argument for these structures and the argument against them. The line outside the Knickerbocker had faces in it. This one arrives as an email. The extra yield demanded for holding risky corporate debt sits around 269 basis points, close to the tightest it has been since before 2008. Underneath it, this. About 8% of the interest income these funds report is not cash. The borrower settles it in more debt. The fund books that debt as income. Nobody has defaulted, nobody has been paid. One last piece of plumbing. The Knickerbocker did not clear for itself. It cleared through a bank. The banks never left. American banks now have more than $1 trillion of credit out to non-bank lenders, better than half of what the private credit funds alone manage. 1907 had one Morgan and no Fed. 2026 has a Fed and no Morgan. Morgan's library still stands on 36th Street. Which side of that door is the money on now? The next film is Wall Street stopped the 1929 crash on Thursday. It lasted 1 weekend.